Hello and welcome. In this episode, Russia is preparing for a big offensive. That's at least what the Ukrainians are afraid of. Putin is canceling more public appearances that are generally expected from him, and a general overview over the situations along the front lines in the war in Ukraine. Russia has started snap exercises of its military, but they shouldn't be understood as an impeding invasion. The whole situation there is that Lukashenko keeps up the appearance of trying to help the Russian side, Putin, while at the same time he talks about threatening NATO. We've heard the stories in the past months that NATO is preparing to invade Belarus the whole time to have a justification of not intervening, not joining the war in Ukraine, which might very well call for the end of his dictatorship. By keeping up the impression that NATO is actually a threat for Belarus, he has an excuse basically not to join the war. The GUR, that's the Ukrainian military intelligence, is saying that the missile attacks that are being done on Ukrainian territory are in part done with Kh-55 and Tupolev 95 as well as Tupolev 160 bombers. So Kh-55 are the missiles, the cruise missiles, and those, some of them at least, have been handed over to Russia in accordance to the Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, at that time the third biggest in the world, as well as not just the nuclear weapons it gave to Russia, but it also handed over cruise missiles and bombers, and now at least a part of them are being employed against Ukraine itself. In the Budapest Memorandum, Russia acknowledged the territorial integrity of Ukraine and guaranteed it. It acknowledged it and said it's never going to use force against Ukraine, neither economic nor military force, to change the status quo. And we can see how well they held up to that. Ukraine is now saying that they shot down all Shahed 136 and 131 that have been used against it on the 14th of December. They claim 100% shoot down ratio of this attack. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said on the 13th of December that Ukraine is expecting a big Russian offensive in January or February of 2023. The mobilization of the past months, as well as the employment of heavy weaponry, is indicating that, as well as that Russia has gained some fresh reserves by the evacuation of the right bank of the Dnipro. The troops will likely not be strong enough for a successful, even for the attempt of a successful encirclement operation. The classic Russian tactic that they want to create cauldrons seems extremely unlikely, so that we will see some kind of encirclement of the front line along the Donbass seems highly unlikely. The most likely point for those attacks will probably be Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, so more or less from this area here up to the Russian border, as those are part of one of the main reasons for the Russian invasion, and having conquered Donetsk and Luhansk in full would mean a victory for the Russian side, and a victory that Putin could sell at home. So we should probably not expect a vast drive up here along the Dnipro, or maybe another invasion in the direction of Sumy or Kiev. It's much more likely that the Russian offensive will just happen more or less along that front line here. That will also mean, obviously, that they will go headlong into Ukrainian defensive positions, which should limit their successes and cause massive casualties. But as said, this is a guesstimation. It's not really the fact yet. They might still surprise us in this regard. When it comes to the eastern front north of the Sovietsky Donetsk, we have reports of Russian attacks northwest of Svatove, more or less along that line here. We have numerous attacks being reported. The Russians saying the Ukrainian side is preparing an offensive here, still in the direction of Svatove. That's what Russian military bloggers are saying. The Russians are also attacking further south close to Kremina, more or less in that area here from Chervono-Popivka down to the Siversky Donetsk. The Russians are reporting heavy Ukrainian attacks in the region. The fighting seems to not lead to many changes of hand on the ground in Ukraine. Russian military bloggers are at the same time warning that heavy Ukrainian attacks are coming, and they see Crimea endangered and say that if Crimea is falling, then the whole front line might unravel. But at the same time, there are some others, at least, are saying that the situation isn't that bad because by now the fortifications along the front line have been massively extended and are not by now extensive, and they are manned by huge numbers of mobilized people, so they should be able to hold more or less. That's at least the expectation from the Russian military bloggers. South of the Siversky Donetsk, so along this line, the heavy fighting is continuing. There are still battles for Bilohorivka. I have no confirmed I don't even found claims that one side says they have captured more or have achieved anything. The only reports are that the Russians are attacking and have been repulsed. Further south, the attacks more or less continue, and now we have Russian claims. We have a lot of Russian claims this time. The majority of them is unconfirmed, but they claim they have reached the outskirts of Soledar and are now basically pushing further north. The Russians are also saying they are advancing in Bakhmut itself. And here we have, no, that's Marinka. No, that's not Bakhmut, my mistake. They are advancing in Bakhmut itself, pushing west. They claim that they control 90% of Opytne, which is here. And so the fighting is continuing along the whole line here. But I don't really have any confirmed successes. But with the intensity of the attacks, we should at least guess that the Russians have advanced to some degree in some areas of the front line. Further south, around Avdivka, there are continuous reports about heavy fighting around Avdivka itself, and the Russians are reporting that the Ukrainians did a massive counterattack in the direction of Pervomaiske. This is here, like from Pervomaiske south. I don't have any proof of the losses in this regard, as in the past some of the attacks have been proven to be highly costly without achieving anything. The Russians themselves claim they control the majority of Vodiane, which will allow them to advance further north really soon. Further south, the Russians are saying they are now controlling 90% of Marinka. I cannot confirm this, but it's what the Russians are claiming. Here we have some video of Marinka, where you can see the situation of the town, how the town is looking by now. You see a field of destruction visible in this. Further south, though, to that degree right now, it's unconfirmed how far the Russians have advanced. 90% would obviously mean they more or less have reached that line. That seems to be unconfirmed, but they are claiming at the same time that they have reached that road here further south and that they are now controlling it, which is obviously important to reach both the Marinka itself for reinforcement from the south, as well as to supply the whole southern front line here. As soon as it's captured, this is much more difficult for the Ukrainian side. Further south, I don't have any any significant reports of fighting going on here. There have been some battles, but no territory has changed hands in the last few days, as far as I can find. In the southern area, the southern front more or less, the Russians are continuing their extensive works on fortifications, and we have reports about the damaged bridge in Melitopol. We see one image here. The Russians are saying that it has been done with 15 to 20 kilograms of explosives, and you can see that I know we have some specialists for statics and stuff like this, engineers. These are images, so you can judge how heavy the damage is. And from my understanding, which is extremely limited, those pillars are the most important part. So while the upper parts can be fairly easy, are fairly easy to replace, the pillars aren't. They basically have to force a complete deconstruction of everything above and then massive works on the pillars to replace them. So this seems to be that this bridge is significantly damaged here. And the Russians are now saying within 2 weeks they're going to establish a alternative to cross the river in this point. And I found some images here which shows crossings over the river in that area, but we see yellow are small crossings, big crossings are red, and black is for trains. But the river itself is only fairly small. I've seen images from 5 meters. He's mentioning here 10 to 20 meters. So those are distances where the establishment of fordings might be possible, and where pioneering equipment might be it might be possible to use pioneering equipment to cross it, so that the Ukrainian side will be completely able to cut down the transport over the river. Seems somewhat unlikely, but we'll have to watch the development and see what the Ukrainians are going to do here. Here we see like a lot of the bridges are closely around Melitopol, which is in range of the Ukrainian HIMARS systems. And here we see images of the river here. And as you can see, by widening it's probably possible for the Russian side to even create fording possibilities there. But nevertheless, any bridge that is damaged will obviously slow down the supply and might cause at some point some supply issues further west of that line here, so in that highly important area north of the Crimean Peninsula. We have reports that the French President Macron has said that the negotiations in Zaporizhzhia power plant are advancing when it comes to the removal of heavy weaponry. It seems to be some truth to it that they are advancing, but there is no report that the Ukrainian side has that the Russian side has actually agreed to it at that point. So in this regard, there seems to be promising negotiations to remove heavy weaponry, but as of now, there is nothing to really confirm as of yet. Partisans, there have been reports that the deputy head of the Kherson Oblast, Vitaly Bulyuk, has been faced with an IED attack. His driver is dead. Bulyuk himself is injured. And Ukraine is saying that partisans have delivered it information about Russian troops in Horlivka, in Donetsk, if I'm not completely wrong. And that led to an artillery attack that destroyed a big troop concentration, a lot of material, and supposedly killed 100 Russian soldiers. And we now have reports from the Wall Street Journal that at least 20 partisans remained active in Kherson during the whole period of the occupation, supplying the Ukrainian government with continuous information about Russian troop movement, Russian positions, etc. And it's being said that they have been essential for the success of the strikes deep in the Russian hinterland here, while the front line was here, as those partisans were reporting the whole time for the target information for the Ukrainian long-range artillery systems. When it comes to the mobilization, there are reports that Wagner is still continuing its mobilization within prisons. The Ukrainian Resistance Center is saying by now Prigozhin has sent 23,000 Russian prisoners to the front line. They are suffering extreme losses. There have been interviews with captured partisans, with captured Wagner mercenaries, and one of them was saying like they were promised a lot, and then in the end, after 2 weeks, they were sent directly into the front line, into high casualty, high risk operations. And of his 90 people, the 90 people in his unit, 17 were killed. 70 out of 90 were killed really fast. The Duma is now reading a law, is in the process of reading a law that would allow the government to hand over defense production into the private hand. It's somewhat interesting because usually it's more often that government takes tighter control of the defense industry inside of a war. But it is explained that the defense industry in private hands will cut red tape and will allow for more efficient production and faster production due to less bureaucracy. And while that might be true and should be true, there's one aspect that should not be forgotten. If state-owned entities are being handed over to private hands, somebody is receiving that. And that will allow the Putin government to enrich its supporters, to calm down supporters, and to reward supporters of the past 10 months of war that might have suffered losses at other positions. But if they are now getting a tank production facility in their hands that is receiving huge volume of orders from the government itself, it will allow them to enrich themselves. So we might need to pay some attention how, if for instance, Kadyrov suddenly receives the ownership of some factory. I think this is a big part of that whole thing, because it obviously allows the Russian government in times like this, where a lot of its oligarchs have lost property, have had their assets being confiscated. This will allow the Russian government to easily compensate at least the most loyal among them in a certain way. And when it comes to the mobilization, there's also one report from the Crimea. The Crimean government, the occupation government there, has said if you were residing in Crimea prior to the 24th of February and now you are participating in the so-called special military operation, so basically in the war in Ukraine, you will receive a plot of land as a reward afterwards. In political terms, Putin has postponed his speech in front of the two houses of the Duma without mentioning a current date. This speech can be generally compared with the State of the Union address that is being held in the US, and it's usually done once a year since 1994. The last speech was in April of 2021, and by now it's clear that the earliest possibility for a new speech will be in 2023. So throughout 2022, there has not been that speech, even though the last one is now more than 1.5 years in the past. The likely estimation is that this speech was supposed to be a victory speech in probably March or April 2022 that would declare the total victory over Ukraine, maybe the annexation of big parts of it, maybe claims that this was a strategic victory or something like this, because it has a historic precedent. When Putin annexed the Crimean Peninsula, he used that very speech to announce it and to celebrate it. As the speech supposedly is concerning everything of the Russian government, all parts of Russia, especially when it comes to the plans by the government, from economy to society, education, interior and foreign policy, down to the military. It has to be prepared extensively. It has to be adjusted to the current situation, and it's supposed to show the plans for the future. So any speech that was meant to happen in the past was probably impossible because of the fluid and situation that was increasingly getting more dramatic within Ukraine. The Putin usually holds that once a year, as well as his usual press conference, which usually addresses questions from the population as well. But in this regard, as it would be extremely likely that oh my God, just realized my collar is gone, that usually this would include questions from the population, but in the current situation, it's obvious that the majority of the questions would concern the war. And framing this in advance, having just scripted questions, seems unlikely that the Russian government wanted to do this, a manipulation of the public this obvious, that there are no questions about the troubles, there are nothing like this. So Putin has actually canceled that interview, which should be seen in that light as well, because anything else but the war is the topic in those interviews, it seems ludicrous. And if the questions are very soft and more or less praising Putin, then the population might realize that they are being shown a scripted reality, and the effect would be less good than not having that interview in that press conference at all. Russia's State Duma Committee on State Construction and Legislation First Deputy Chairperson Irina Pankina was saying only the so-called DNR and LNR are currently being integrated in the Russian judicial system. So basically the Ukrainian oblasts of Luhansk and Donetsk. There are several possibilities to interpret this. Either the most important provinces are in focus, because this is for Russian public and population and everything, supposedly the most important part of it. Another option would be that it shows the acceptance of the fact that the others might be lost, that Kherson and Zaporizhzhia might be lost to the Ukrainian, to future Ukrainian advances, or it could be seen that this is basically a preparation for potential concessions in negotiations when it comes about the possibility to end the war. As said, those are different interpretations how this can be seen. I really can't say which one of it is, and I'm pretty sure I've forgotten one or two other possible reasons for that, and I'm obviously happy if you comment them so we all can get some more enlightenment and some more insights to the potential interpretation of this weird fact that Russia is only integrating 2 out of 4 provinces into the judicial system, whereas we could argue that Luhansk is more or less fully occupied. That is not the case with Donetsk, so that shouldn't be an argument in regards to the other 2 provinces, to the other 2 oblasts as well. Finally, there's the Russian opposition is saying that currently the Duma is preparing a law that would ban work from home for the public sector, security sector, and IT. So they would have to work in the company that hires them. It would be illegal to do it otherwise. And the whole idea with it is that it would probably force all the people that have fled the country and are now in air quotes working from home while they're actually working in Georgia or in Western Europe or something, that would force them to either return to Russia or give up their job and then look out for themselves how to finance their lives with this law coming up. And obviously the plan would be to make sure that people can't dodge any further mobilizations and that they are forced to return back to Russia. Also, we have reports about the whole occupied area that the Russians intensify their attempts to force Ukrainians to take Russian passports. When it comes to the support, we have reports that the US is supposedly planning to give Ukraine JDAMs. Now, JDAMs are a system that turns dumb bombs into smart bombs, which basically gives them a guidance system that includes GPS tracking, so they could pre-plan the targets, and then the Ukrainian jets would just have to drop the bombs and they would somewhat glide to them. The issue is, though, that JDAM has a very limited range, so to what extent that can actually be used is fairly unclear. We can't say yet whether that is going to be a big difference or whether there is some planning of maybe adding the JDAM system to some other system that is not air launched. Like in theory, maybe they find a way to add it to some artillery rockets or something, and then creating a cheap version to increase the accurate fire that is currently limited to the HIMARS and M270 as well as Excalibur bombs. Things like that are obviously pure speculation, but personally I don't see the huge benefit of JDAM yet, so I might have overlooked something here. Again, please feel invited to comment in the comment sections, because the path JDAM to reach longer range would mean that the Ukrainian jet has to fly higher, and the higher it flies, the more easy it can be attacked with the Russian air defense systems and with the Russian fighters that are themselves flying very high and using longer range air-to-air missiles than the Ukrainians even possess. So this would force the Ukrainians to endanger their pilots just to drop some additional bombs. So I don't fully see the reasoning behind that, but maybe there's something I've overlooked. As said, please feel invited to comment that. The resolution, Israel is saying that Iran is currently working on reducing the range of its ballistic missiles prior to handing them over to Russia. The reason for that is the resolution 22 2231, 2231 of the Security Council from 2015, according to which transfer and usage of Iranian missiles with a range over 300 kilometers and a payload over 500 kilograms is forbidden until October 2023, so almost for another year. Should Iran violate these rules by handing over ballistic missiles with longer range or bigger payload to Russia, there might be some automatic sanctions that hit Iran just as soon as it's acknowledged that this has happened. That's what's coming from the Israeli side here. We also have reports that Patriot are going to be delivered from the US. It seems more or less clear. I saw in the writing, it seems that there might be some doubts, like they're thinking about it, they're considering it or something. But it seems, yeah, we see here, for instance, preparing to send Patriot missiles. So it seems close to being certain that Ukraine is getting Patriot air defense systems. It should help the Ukrainians massively because the Patriot system is one of the longest range air defense system in Western possession, with a range of roughly 100 miles, so 160 kilometers. And some of its missiles that the system can be loaded with can be used against ballistic missiles, so they would add some ballistic missile defense possibility for the Ukrainian side in case the ballistic missiles are starting to get delivered by Iran. You can obviously interpret it as a sign of trust from the American government towards the Ukrainian government, as the training for those systems takes many, many months. And if you commit to delivering a system that takes half a year, more or less, in training, then you basically commit to the fact that you expect the Ukrainian government to still be fully functional at this point, which also is a sign of trust towards the Ukrainian side from the Americans here. I have reports from a German security policy website that, according to that, Bayer has bought 2 systems of the Skynex air defense system. As you can see here, it's barrel, it's classic flak, so a AAA system. And the only weird thing is it's using 35 millimeters, so it probably has compatible ammunition with the Gepard. It's the most modern version of something like this from the German defense market. But the interesting part is that they are talking about 2 systems of Skynex by the value of 182 million euros. That should be more or less close to $200 million. Now, obviously, it's not that easy, but a system usually is that thing here. It's not a battery. It doesn't include additional radar, command and control systems, nothing else. That would mean one of those things supposedly costs close to 100 million US dollars. Now, we all know it's not that easy. It might include spare parts. It might include a massive amount of ammunition. It will probably include training. It will include a lot more, but the price still seems outrageous. So here again, I'll have to try to find out more about how that price is set up, because a price of $100 million for one of those systems seems fairly extensive, when we regard that the range of it is still more or less limited to probably 5 to 6 kilometers. Nevertheless, it's going to aid the Ukrainian air defense system once they are delivered, but I think the delivery was, yes, beginning of 2024, so that's not going to have any impact on the war next year. Finally, Rheinmetall, the German defense company, is opening a new factory for ammunition in January next year. And it is going to produce ammunition for the calibers 20 to 35 millimeters. That means from July on, roughly, the first 35 millimeter ammunition that can be used for the Gepard that Ukraine is currently using will be produced. So it should help ease the difficulties from the Ukrainian side to source ammunition massively, as Rheinmetall is now taking the production in its own hands within Germany, no longer within Switzerland, where the Swiss have banned the export of produced ammo from this. That's it from me for now. Let me know what you think. Can Russia actually return? The Ukrainian side is fearing a big offensive. Do you think Russia can return, come back more or less, and grab the strategic initiative back? Do you think they can roll back Ukrainian advances from the past months? This channel I'm really looking forward to reading your comments on this. This channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. Thank you very much to everyone who has already supported the channel. If you want to do so, you can do so by the means in the description. Other than that, if you like the video, please hit a thumbs up, leave a comment to help with the algorithm or with all the things where your input might be highly enlightening for the rest of the viewers of us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you can help the channel grow and don't miss future videos. I apologize again for the background noise. Unfortunately, some of it is the gardening, so I have no influence on that, but the hammering that might occasionally be audible in the background is because the workers are finishing up the construction that is currently happening in the background. Beginning of next year, there should be quiet. It should be more or less quiet when I do the recordings. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your time, and I'll be back.